The lonely giantess. She walked alone across the wide valley, her steps heavy against the earth. The ground trembled softly each time her foot touched the soil. She was bigger than anyone else in her village, taller, broader, stronger. Some called her a warrior, but most whispered another name behind her back. Too big. For years she carried this word like a wound. When others laughed together around the fires at night, she sat away in silence. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to shrink her large frame, but she could never make herself small. She had learned that no matter how hard she tried, she would always stand out. The giantess was not without beauty. Her hair shone like dark silk. Her eyes glowed like embers, but she never believed it. She saw only the size of her body, the width of her shoulders, the strength in her arms. To her it was not beauty, only proof that she was not breeding material, as she once overheard the elders say. That phrase broke her heart, and it never left her. Every day she worked harder than anyone, lifting stone, carrying wood, building shelters. People praised her strength, but never saw her as a woman. They treated her like a tool, useful but not lovable. And when the young ones found partners, when families grew, she turned away to hide the sting in her chest. She told herself, "This is my fate. I was not born for love." But fate was not finished with her. One evening, as the sky burned orange and red, she stood by the river. She bent low, looking at her reflection in the water. The ripples made her face blur, and she thought it was better that way. She whispered into the quiet, "No man could want me. My body is too big. I am not meant for love." Her voice trembled, carried away by the wind. What she did not know was that someone else had heard her. A man, small compared to her size but strong in his own way, had come from another world. A human. He had been sent to her people as a traveler, a helper and perhaps a bridge between their kinds. He had seen her many times from afar, working, building, always alone. While others avoided her, his eyes often followed her with quiet interest. On this night he stood hidden among the trees, listening to her sorrow spill into the river air. His heart tightened. He could not understand why she thought so little of herself, when all he saw was grace in her movements and power in her spirit. The giantess rose, wiping at her eyes, and turned to leave. Her heavy steps echoed softly on the ground. She did not see the man, but he stepped forward a little, as if his feet were pulled by something stronger than reason. From that night onward, he began to notice her even more. He saw the way she avoided crowds, how she kept her head lowered when others passed. He saw the loneliness wrapped around her like a cloak, and something inside him whispered, "She is not what they say. She is more." The giantess, meanwhile, felt the same emptiness each day. She wondered if the gods had made her too large as a cruel joke. She feared she would live her life as a shadow, remembered only for her size, never for her heart. Yet the story was only beginning. There would come a day when the human would step closer, when his voice would break through her silence, and when her world would change forever. But for now, the valley held its secret. A lonely giantess who believed she was unworthy, and a man who already knew she was more precious than she could imagine. And in the space between them, between despair and hope, between silence and love, something powerful was waiting to grow. The human's arrival. The morning sun rose slowly over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and pale blue. The giantess was already awake, carrying logs of wood across her shoulders as if they weighed nothing. Her people nodded at her strength, but kept their distance, as always. She had grown used to the space between herself and others. To her, it felt like an invisible wall, thick, cold, unbreakable. That same day, strangers arrived at the edge of the village. They were humans, travelers from another world. The people gathered, whispering and curious, for humans were smaller, different, but clever in their ways. They brought tools, trade, and stories of distant stars. Among them was one man, quiet but observant. His name was not spoken much in the crowd, because he was not loud, not boastful, but his eyes missed nothing. He noticed her almost instantly. The giantess stood apart, her large frame impossible to ignore. She was taller than every warrior, broader than every hunter. Some of the villagers looked at her with respect, others with pity. The human, however, looked at her differently. His gaze was not filled with fear or judgment. Instead, there was something else, something softer, quieter, but strong. For days, he watched from afar. When the villagers worked, he worked alongside them. When they laughed around the fire, he listened, smiling faintly. But his eyes always searched for her. He saw the way she lifted stones that no other could move. He saw her walk alone when others walked in pairs. He saw the silence that surrounded her, heavier than any rock she carried. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled across the valley. The rain poured down like a river from the sky. The villagers ran to shelter, but the giantess stayed outside, dragging heavy beams of wood to keep them from flooding away. The human saw her struggle against the rushing water. Without thinking, he ran to her side. "You'll be swept away," one of the villagers shouted at him, but he did not stop. The giantess looked down in surprise as the small human pressed his weight against the beam, helping her steady it. His strength was nothing compared to hers, but the effort in his eyes was real. He gritted his teeth, rain soaking his hair and face, and together they forced the beam into place. When the danger passed, she stared at him in silence. He was drenched, shivering, but smiling faintly. "You shouldn't carry all of this alone," he said softly. Her heart beat faster than she expected. She turned away quickly, not trusting her voice. For years, no one had stood beside her. No one had even tried. But this man, so small compared to her, had chosen to fight the storm with her, as if her burden was his own. After that day, something changed. The human began to appear, more often near her. Sometimes he brought water when she worked. Sometimes he asked small questions, curious about her world. Other times he simply sat nearby while she labored, saying little but making his presence known. She tried to ignore him at first. She told herself it meant nothing. But slowly she found herself listening for his footsteps. At night, when she sat by the river, she would catch herself wondering about him. His courage, his strange kindness, his eyes that did not flinch when they looked at her. It unsettled her because hope was dangerous. Hope could break her heart all over again. But the human was patient. He never mocked her size. He never treated her as a beast of burden. When others said, she was born for lifting, not for loving, his eyes darkened, and he walked away. He carried respect for her in every small gesture. And though she tried to keep her walls high, cracks began to appear. One evening, the giantess found herself trapped in silence with him near the edge of the forest. She had gathered wood, and he had been nearby sketching something on a piece of parchment. She paused, curious despite herself. "What are you drawing?" she asked, her voice low, unused to such questions. He looked up, startled, then turned the page to show her. It was a rough sketch of the valley, but at the center stood a figure, tall, strong, unmistakable. Her. She froze, not knowing what to say. "Why? Why draw me?" she whispered. He smiled, shy but sure. "Because when I look at this land, you are what stands out most. Not the mountains, not the river. You." Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her that way, not once. She turned quickly, pretending to adjust the wood on her shoulders, but her hands trembled. She walked away before he could see the tears that threatened to fall. That night, she could not sleep. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps she had been wrong all these years. Perhaps not every man would turn away. Perhaps this human, so small in body but large in heart, saw something different in her. The thought frightened her as much as it warmed her. She whispered again to the river, but this time her words were different. "If he is playing a trick, I will break. But if he is true..." Her voice faded into the dark. Behind her, unseen in the shadows of the trees, The human stood once more, listening, and in his chest he carried a silent promise. He would show her that she was more than her size, more than her pain, more than the cruel words that haunted her. The story of the lonely giantess was no longer hers alone. It had begun to entwine with his, and the world would soon learn that when a human chooses to love, no wall is too high, no heart too guarded, and no fate too fixed. The breaking point. The night was quiet, almost too quiet. The giantess sat by the river again, her usual place of refuge. The stars reflected in the water, broken by ripples that danced in the moonlight. She hugged her knees close, even though her arms could not make her body small. She wished, just for once, that she could vanish into the shadows and be unseen. Her chest was heavy with a secret pain she had carried for years. Tonight it felt heavier than ever, because the human, that human, had begun to break down the walls she had spent her life building, and that terrified her more than loneliness ever had. Behind her, soft footsteps pressed against the grass. She knew them by now. They were lighter than her people's steps, yet steady, sure. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. He stopped a few paces away. "You always sit here at night," he said gently. She did not answer at first. Her eyes stayed locked on the water. Finally, she sighed. "Because the river does not laugh at me. It does not whisper behind my back. The river does not tell me what I cannot be." The human's brow furrowed, but he stayed silent, giving her space. The giantess drew in a shaky breath. Her voice dropped lower, trembling like a fragile thread. "Do you know what they say about me?" He stepped closer. "I know some of their words. I don't care for them. They say I am too big," she continued, the words spilling faster, now like stones tumbling down a hill. "Too wide, too tall, too much of everything. They say no man could ever want me, that I am not made for love, not made for a family, not breeding material. That is what the elders called me." Her voice cracked, and for a moment silence swallowed the air. The human's hands tightened into fists. He wanted to shout, to curse those cruel voices, but he held himself back. He knew this moment was not about his anger. It was about her pain. The giantess's eyes burned, but she refused to let tears fall. She shook her head slowly, staring down at the reflection of her broad shoulders in the water. "Even if you are kind to me, even if you smile at me, I know the truth. I am not meant for love. No one could want this." She gestured at her body, her massive frame that towered above him. Her words cut into the night like a blade. And then silence again, thick, suffocating. She expected him to agree, or to walk away like everyone else always had. That was the moment she braced for. Rejection, the final blow to her fragile hope. But instead, the human stepped forward until he stood right beside her. He lifted his gaze up to her face, not with pity, not with fear, but with something fierce, something steady. "You are wrong," he said simply. His voice was low, but it carried like thunder. She blinked at him, startled. "What?" "You are wrong," he repeated. "They see only size. They are blind. But I see you." He placed a hand over his own chest. "I see strength that protects. I see hands that build. I see a heart that has suffered but still beats with courage." His voice grew softer. "I see beauty that no one else deserves, because they are too blind to notice it." Her breath caught. She stared at him as if he had spoken a language she had never heard before. "Beauty?" she whispered, the word almost foreign on her tongue. "Yes," he said firmly. "Beauty." She turned her face away, ashamed of the tears that finally broke free and slid down her cheeks. "Don't lie to me, don't play with me, I could not survive it." He reached out then, slowly, carefully, and placed his hand against hers. His hand was so small compared to hers, but the warmth of it sent a shock through her entire body. "I don't lie," he said softly. "Not about this. You are not too big. You are not unworthy. You are not alone anymore. Not while I breathe. Her body trembled. For so long she had believed she was unlovable, that her size was a curse. And now here was a man, a human, standing beside her, looking at her as if she were the most precious thing he had ever seen. Her walls cracked. She could not hold them anymore. A sob broke from her chest, and before she could stop herself, she leaned forward. She expected him to flinch, to retreat, to be swallowed by her size, but instead he held his ground. He let her head rest against his shoulder, though it dwarfed him completely. His arms wrapped around her, small but steady, as if he could shield her from the world. She closed her eyes, her tears soaking into his shirt, and for the first time in her life she allowed herself to believe just a little that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of love. The night stretched on, but the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of promises unspoken, of feelings that could not yet be named, of a bond that had only just begun. The river flowed beside them, carrying her sorrow away, while the stars above bore witness to the birth of something fragile but powerful. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know if the world would accept them or if her doubts would return. But in that moment, held in the arms of a human who refused to see her as anything less than beautiful, she felt a spark of hope stronger than any pain she had ever known, and for the first time in her life the giantess dared to dream. Love awakens. The days after that night by the river felt different. For the giantess, the world looked the same, the valley, the mountains, the restless villagers. But something inside her had shifted. She no longer walked with her head always bowed. She still carried logs, lifted stones, and worked as hard as ever, but now she carried something else too. His words. You are not too big. You are not alone anymore. She repeated them to herself in the quiet moments. At first she feared they would fade like morning mist, but they lingered, warm and steady, as if etched into her heart. The human did not disappear after that night. He returned again and again. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he was silent, but his presence was constant. He walked beside her when she gathered wood. He shared food with her when others avoided her fire. He listened when she spoke, and when she had no words, he listened still. The villagers noticed. Whispers began to curl through the air like smoke. Why does he stay near her? Does he not see her size? Perhaps humans are strange. Perhaps he pities her. The giantess heard these whispers, sharp as knives. They made her chest tighten, but when she looked at him, at the calm in his eyes, the honesty in his smile, she felt the sting fade. For the first time in her life, she began to believe what mattered was not what others said, but what she felt when he was near. One evening they sat together on a small rise above the valley. The sky burned with sunset, red melting into violet. The human leaned back on the grass, arms behind his head, watching the stars emerge one by one. The giantess sat upright, her knees pulled close, unsure how to relax beside him. Why do you always look at the sky? She asked. He smiled faintly. Because it reminds me how small I am, but also how endless the world is. Out there are 1,000 places, 1,000 wonders. Yet, he turned his head, looking at her. I find myself wanting to be here with you. Her heart stumbled. She lowered her gaze quickly, afraid he would see too much in her face. You should not say such things, she whispered. Why not? Because I do not know what to do with them. He laughed softly, not mocking, but gentle. Then, don't do anything. Just let them be. Words can rest like stones by a river. You don't have to carry them all at once. She blinked at him, surprised at the way he made something so heavy sound so simple. She studied his face in the fading light. Compared to her, he was so small, so fragile looking. And yet she realized he was not fragile at all. His strength was not in his size, but in the way he refused to turn away. Over time, the distance between them shrank. The giantess found herself speaking more, telling him things she had never shared. She spoke of her childhood, of how the other children mocked her size, how even the elders called her useful but not lovable. She admitted how she once dreamed of being held, but gave up that dream long ago. The human listened, never interrupting, never judging. When she finished, his silence was not empty. It was heavy with care. Finally, he reached out and placed his hand over hers again, just as he had by the river. "I wish I could take all those words away," he said softly. "But since I cannot, let me give you new ones instead." Her throat tightened. "What new ones?" "That you are more than they will ever see. That you are worth more than any measure. That your heart is strong enough to carry love. And one day, you will see it, too." She wanted to believe him, and slowly she did. One night, as the village slept, she stood at the edge of the forest, restless. She thought she was alone, but he came quietly, as he often did. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, my thoughts are too loud." "Then share them," he said. She hesitated, then turned to him. Her voice was raw. "I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of believing you. Of believing that you truly care for me. Because if I believe and I am wrong, it will destroy me." The human stepped closer. His eyes shone in the moonlight, clear and steady. "Then let me carry that fear with you. If it hurts, it will hurt us both. If it is joy, it will be joy for us both." Her breath caught. His words pressed against her walls, and this time they crumbled. Slowly, carefully, she lowered herself to sit on the grass before him. Her size dwarfed him completely, yet when he reached out to touch her cheek, she did not pull away. His hand was small, but it burned like fire against her skin. In that moment, the silence between them was not emptiness. It was alive. It was filled with the sound of her heart racing, of his breath steady and sure, of the fragile bond between them glowing, brighter than the stars above. The giantess closed her eyes, leaning ever so slightly into his touch. It was the smallest movement, yet for her it was the largest step she had ever taken. For the first time, she allowed herself to accept what had always seemed impossible, that she was worthy of being loved. But the world around them was not blind. The villagers saw the way she softened around him, the way he stayed near her. Whispers grew louder, sharper. Some were cruel. "She will crush him. It is unnatural. She is desperate, and he is foolish." Others were filled with fear. What if they try for a child? What kind of creature would be born? The giantess heard these words, and doubt tried to return, but every time he was there. When her hands shook with anger, he steadied them. When her heart trembled with fear, he whispered strength into her ear. Their love was no longer a spark. It was a flame, small but fierce, burning against the cold around them. And so in those nights under the stars and in the quiet days by the river, something beautiful began to grow. It was not loud or sudden. It was slow, patient, steady. It was trust. It was tenderness. It was the beginning of a love that would soon face greater trials, but would not be broken. The giantess, once alone, now walked beside a man who refused to let her believe she was unworthy. And though the world doubted, though shadows whispered, she carried something new in her chest, something she had never dared to carry before. Hope. The union. The seasons shifted. The rains passed. The valley turned green again, and the village continued with its rhythms. But for the giantess, life was no longer the same. She was no longer the silent shadow who walked alone at dusk. Everywhere she went, he followed. Not like a servant. Not like a lost child. He walked with her as an equal, as if their steps belonged together. When she lifted stone beams, he steadied the ropes. When she gathered wood, he carried smaller bundles by her side. When she sat alone by the river, he sat too, without asking, without hesitation. The villagers could not ignore it any longer. Their whispers grew louder, no longer hidden. She is using him. No, He is using her. He wants her strength. Whatever it is, it cannot last. Look at her size. Look at his. It is unnatural. The words stung. They reached the giantess like arrows she could not dodge. Each time she heard them, her heart trembled with doubt. But every time she faltered, his voice steadied her. Let them talk, he would say. Their words cannot change what we feel. And slowly, she began to believe him. The festival of fire one night. The village held its festival of fire, when great torches lit the night sky and drums echoed through the mountains. It was a time of dance, of food, of celebration. But for the giantess, festivals had always meant pain. She remembered years of standing at the edge of the circle, too large to join, too feared to be asked. She would watch as others danced, touched and laughed while she melted into the shadows. This time was no different. She lingered at the edge of the firelight, trying to make herself invisible, but the humans saw her. As the villagers danced in circles, he broke away from them and walked straight to her. Without hesitation, he held out his hand. The giantess froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Inviting you," he said simply. "Don't," she begged. "They will laugh. They will mock you." "Let them," he said, his eyes shining in the firelight. "Let them laugh at me. I don't care. What I care about is you." For a moment she could not move. Her body shook with fear, but his hand remained there, steady, waiting, never wavering, and slowly, trembling, she placed her much larger hand into his. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Drums faltered. All eyes turned to them. The human did not release her. Instead, he stepped closer, guiding her into the circle of firelight. The villagers whispered, some angry, some mocking, some shocked, into silence. But he only smiled up at her as if they were the only two souls alive. "Listen to the drums," he told her, and together they moved. Her steps were heavy at first, clumsy, as if her body was betraying her. But then she felt his smaller hand squeeze hers, his eyes never leaving her face. Slowly her body began to follow the rhythm. The ground shook under her steps, but this time it was not shame. It was power. The villagers stared, some in disbelief, some in anger, but a few began to see something else, something beautiful. For the first time in her life, the giantess danced, and she was not alone. After the fire, when the drums quieted and the flames dimmed, the human and the giantess walked away together. Behind them, the whispers were sharper than ever. "She disgraces us. He will regret this. They will never survive together." But for the first time, the giantess did not lower her head. She walked tall, her hand still holding his. Later, when they sat by the river, she turned to him. "Why do you do this?" she asked. Her voice was thick with wonder and disbelief. "Why do you stay near me, even when they all speak against us?" His answer was simple. "Because I love you." The words struck her like a thunderclap. She froze, her heart hammering against her chest. "Love?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I love your strength. I love your spirit. I love the way you carry pain but still keep moving. I love the way you look at the stars as if you've been waiting for someone to share them with." Tears stung her eyes. She had dreamed of these words, but she had never believed she would hear them. "Not truly. I don't know how to be loved," she admitted. "Then let me show you," he whispered. The union from that night forward, their bond deepened. He became her anchor, and she became his shelter. When storms raged, they worked side by side. When loneliness crept in, they drove it away together. Their lives, once separate, now entwined like roots beneath the soil. But the villagers' whispers turned into open voices. Some mocked him openly. Others warned her she was destroying her future. A few even spat the word unnatural in their direction. The giantess wavered, fear gnawing at her heart. "They will never accept us," she whispered to him one night. "Then we will stop asking them to," he said. We don't need their acceptance. We need only each other. And so, despite the storm of voices around them, they chose each other. Their union was not marked by grand ceremony. There were no feasts, no gifts, no blessings from the elders. It was marked instead by something far greater, a vow spoken beneath the stars, with the river as witness. He placed his hand against her chest, feeling the thunder of her heart. As long as this heart beats, I will be with you. She placed her hand around him, her massive palm enveloping his body but holding him with the gentleness of a feather. As long as you see me, I will not hide again. The vows were simple, but they were unbreakable. The defiance. The following weeks were not easy. The villagers continued to resist. Some tried to shame them, others tried to separate them, but nothing worked. Every time they saw the giantess, she was with him. Every time they looked for the human, he was at her side. Whispers lost their strength when faced with truth. And slowly, very slowly, some of the villagers began to soften. A few began to see the love between them not as a curse but as something fierce and undeniable. The giantess, once the symbol of loneliness, now became something else. A symbol of courage. A symbol of defiance. The foreshadow, but deep in her heart, she still carried fear. Could this truly last? Could such a love survive in a world that doubted it? She lay awake many nights, listening to his steady breathing beside her, and wondered if fate would allow them peace. She feared it would not. What she did not yet know was that something was already changing within her body, something unexpected, something that would transform their lives forever. But for now they stood together, united, unshaken, unafraid of the world's judgment. For the first time in her life, the giantess was no longer alone. She was loved, and she belonged. And the world, whether it liked it or not, would have to face the truth. Their union was real, their union was strong, and it was only the beginning. The miracle. The valley was quiet under the silver light of the moon. The giantess lay awake, staring at the stars. Beside her the human slept peacefully, his chest rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. His warmth against her side was a comfort she never thought she would know. Yet tonight comfort was not enough. Her mind was restless, her body unsettled. Something inside her felt different. For weeks now, she had noticed changes. At first she ignored them. Strange weariness, sudden hunger, dreams so vivid they left her trembling. Then came the queasy mornings, the way her hands sometimes shook, the way her heart pounded harder than before. She told herself it was stress, the weight of whispers and judgment. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered a possibility she dared not name. Not for someone like her. Not for someone too big. Not breeding material. Yet the voice would not be silenced. The realization. One morning, she went to the river alone. She bent low, watching her reflection ripple across the water. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her stomach. It felt the same as always, strong, broad, scarred by work. And yet, her breath caught. She remembered the elder's words, cruel and sharp. She is not made for family. She will never carry life. Those words had cut into her soul, leaving scars deeper than any wound. But now, for the first time, she dared to hope they had been wrong. Her heart pounded. No, she whispered to the water. It cannot be. It is impossible. Yet even as she said it, tears welled in her eyes. She pressed her palms harder against her body. The thought terrified her, thrilled her, shook her to her core. Could it be true? The confession. That evening, she returned to their shelter. The human was waiting, repairing a broken tool with careful hands. When he looked up and smiled at her, her chest tightened. She wanted to keep her secret a little longer, but the weight of it pressed too hard. I need to tell you something, she whispered. He set the tool aside instantly, his eyes sharp with concern. What is it? She hesitated, trembling. The words refused to come. For so long she had carried only shame in her body. How could she now speak of something so different? At last the words broke free. I think I carry life inside me. Silence fell, heavier than stone. The human blinked, stunned. For a moment he could not breathe. You mean? Her voice cracked. I think I am with child. His reaction. For a heartbeat he said nothing. She braced herself for disbelief, for rejection, for fear. But then his face broke into something she had never seen before. Pure, unshaken joy. You're telling me we made life? His voice shook with awe. Her throat closed. She nodded, uncertain, tears threatening to spill. He let out a shaky laugh, then rose and stepped close, his hands trembling as they reached for hers. This is a miracle. But she shook her head, panic in her eyes. No, it is dangerous. They said I could never. They said it was impossible. If it is true, then what if something is wrong? What if the child cannot survive? What if I cannot? The human tightened his grip on her hands. His voice grew steady. Fierce. Then we face it together. Whatever happens, we face it together. Do you hear me? You are not alone, not anymore. Her tears fell then, hot and unstoppable. She lowered herself until her forehead pressed against his. For the first time, she let herself believe. The fear. The following days were filled with turmoil. The villagers noticed her exhaustion, her sickness. In the mornings, the way she carried herself differently. Whispers spread like fire. Impossible. She carries a child? No, it cannot be. Not her. It must be some sickness. The giantess heard their voices, and doubt gnawed at her again. What if they were right? What if this was not a blessing but a curse? She lay awake at night, her hand pressed to her stomach, torn between hope and fear. But each time, the human was there. He spoke softly, telling her of stars, of distant worlds, of life that survived in places thought barren. If life can grow in the cold of space, he whispered, then surely it can grow in you. His words were like fire in the darkness. The hope as the weeks passed. The truth became undeniable. Her body changed. Her strength shifted, no longer only her own. She felt a heartbeat within her, faint but real, and when she told him, he wept with joy. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, he placed his ear against her stomach. He listened, eyes wide, tears shining. I hear it, he whispered. I hear our child. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. No one had ever called anything hers with such tenderness before. Not her strength, not her body, not her heart. But now, their child. It was more than she had ever dreamed. The villagers' judgment. The whispers grew into shouts. The elders gathered, declaring it dangerous, unnatural. This union must not continue. The child will be a monster. The gods will punish us. The giantess stood before them, trembling but unbroken. For the first time in her life, she did not lower her. She placed a protective hand over her stomach, her voice steady. This child is not a curse, this child is love, and I will protect it, no matter what you say. The human stepped beside her, his hand gripping hers. His voice was sharp as steel. If any dare to harm her or our child, they will answer to me. The crowd murmured, uncertain, shaken. Some still scorned, but others began to see something different, a strength in their union, a fire no judgment could put out. The miracle-accepted days turned into months. The giantess grew heavier, but not with shame, with life. The human never left her side. He carried what weight he could, comforted her through sleepless nights, held her hand when fear returned. And slowly, the whispers of the village began to change. Children were curious, not cruel. Some women softened, offering food and care. Even a few elders began to murmur that perhaps this was no curse but a sign from the gods. And the giantess, once mocked, once dismissed as unworthy, became something else entirely. She became a mother. The moment of truth. One quiet night, under a sky filled with stars, she looked at the human and whispered, "I never thought this could happen. I never thought I could be loved, let alone bring life." He smiled, pressing his forehead to hers. That is why it is called a miracle, because it defies everything the world once believed. And because it proves what I told you from the beginning. You are not too big for love. You were always meant for this. Her eyes closed as tears fell freely. For the first time, the giantess no longer doubted. For the first time, she truly believed. And as the child grew within her, the village, the valley, and even the stars themselves seemed to watch in awe. The impossible had become real. The unloved had become beloved. The barren had become a mother. The miracle had come. Love beyond limits. The night was restless with whispers. The giantess lay inside their shelter, her body heavy with both exhaustion and life. The time had come. The child she carried for so many months now pressed against the edges of her strength. Sweat covered her brow, her breath came ragged, and for the first time in her life she was afraid not for herself, but for the small life within her. The human was at her side, never leaving, not even for a heartbeat. His hands clutched hers, though hers nearly engulfed his completely. He whispered again and again, his voice steady despite his own trembling. "You are strong. You can do this. We are together." The villagers gathered outside, torn between fear and curiosity. Some still believed this birth was dangerous, unnatural. Others had begun to see it as something divine, a blessing disguised as a storm. But none dared to interfere. Hours stretched like eternity. The giantess cried out, her voice shaking the valley, echoing off the mountains. She was no longer the silent, shamed woman who hid in the shadows. Now she roared with the voice of life itself. And then at last a cry pierced the night. A cry not of the giantess, but of the child. The birth. The human wept openly, his tears falling as he held their newborn for the first time. The baby was small compared to the giantess, yet strong, with eyes that shone like stars. Half her, half him, but fully their miracle. When he placed the child into her arms, the giantess trembled. Her massive hands cradled the tiny body as though it were made of glass. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She had carried shame her whole life, carried loneliness heavier than any stone, and now she carried love itself. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Mine, ours." The human wrapped his arms around them both. His voice was thick with awe. "You are not alone anymore. You never will be again." The village transformed at dawn. The villagers gathered once more. The elders came forward, expecting to see proof of their fears. But when they looked upon the child, their voices faltered. The baby was no monster, no curse. It was only a child, beautiful, perfect, alive. The whispers began to change. Some gasped, some softened, and slowly, for the first time, admiration replaced doubt. She did it. She carries life. Perhaps the gods have blessed her after all. The giantess, still weary but radiant with joy, lifted her child, high for all to see. Her voice, once full of sorrow, rang out strong. "This child is proof. Love is no curse. Love is no weakness. Love is stronger than fear." The villagers, shaken by the truth before their eyes, fell silent. Even the cruelest whispers could not stand against what they saw. Healing. The days that followed were unlike any the giantess had known. She was still large, still different, but no longer burdened by shame. She walked with her child in her arms, the human always at her side. She saw the looks of her people shift, some still hesitant, but others filled with respect, even wonder. She had become more than the too big giantess. She was now a mother, a partner, a symbol of courage. She had carried what no one believed she could, and in doing so, she shattered every chain that bound her heart. At night, when the village slept, she and the human sat together under the stars, their child resting peacefully between them. She would watch the human's face glow with pride as he stroked the child's tiny hand. She would watch their child breathe, and in those moments she knew her life had finally begun. The message one evening, as fireflies lit the air, the giantess spoke softly. All my life I believed I was unworthy. I thought my body was a curse, my size a prison. I thought no man could ever want me, but you proved me wrong. The human smiled, pressing his forehead to hers. No, I only showed you what was always true. You were never unworthy. You were never too much. The world simply wasn't enough to see you. Tears filled her eyes again, but they were not tears of pain. They were tears of healing. For the first time, she did not hide them. Their child stirred, letting out a tiny sigh. The giantess held the baby closer, feeling the warmth of life against her chest. She looked at the stars above and whispered, "Thank you." Beyond the valley, in the weeks that followed, word of the miracle spread beyond the valley. Travelers came to see the child, to see the woman who had defied fate, and the human who had loved her against all odds. Some came with doubt, others with awe, but all left changed. The giantess no longer feared their eyes. She stood tall, her child in her arms, her partner at her side, and let the world see her. Her story was no longer just her own. It became a tale told around fires, across villages, and even in distant worlds, that of a woman who believed she was unworthy, and the human who proved that love knows no boundaries. Love beyond limits. As seasons turned, the giantess grew older, but she was never again lonely. She had a family, a partner, a people who slowly learned from her courage. And every time doubt whispered in the back of her mind, she looked at her child's eyes, at her partner's steady smile, and the doubt vanished. Her life was not perfect. There were still struggles, still challenges, but none of it mattered, because love had changed everything. She was no longer too big. She was no longer not breeding material. She was loved. She was a mother. She was proof that love, once found, could break every wall, silence every whisper, and defy every limit. And as she held her child high beneath the endless sky, the stars seemed to shine brighter, as if the universe itself was bowing to the truth she had learned. That love, when true, is greater than fear, greater than shame, greater than destiny itself. Love has no size. Love has no boundary. Love has no limits.